Welcome to Inspired by Success, the podcast where I deep dive into the mindset of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and thought leaders. Get ready to be inspired and gain valuable insights to unlock your true potential. In this episode, we'll discover the tips and strategies that turned Bernadette Joy into the inspiring person she is now. Bernadette, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to start an incredible journey towards financial freedom and becoming a self-made millionaire?
Sure. So the abridged version is I am a first-generation Filipino-American. I am the eighth of my dad's 9 children. I grew up in New York City, went to school in Boston, and then currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina in the States. And I started my personal finance journey in 2016. And when I say 2016, meaning I think everyone has started their personal finance journey as soon as they started spending money. But 2016 was really the year that I decided to be very intentional about what my financial future would look like. And that was the end of what was a 2.5-year MBA program. The same program that I thought was going to solve all my problems in terms of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life and how I wanted to progress my career. And I found myself 10 weeks left in my master's program for my business school, and realized that I still wasn't clear on what I wanted to do with my career. I had now accumulated $72,000 of student loans, and I had a bunch of other, regular people kind of debt, like mortgages and, credit card bills and all of those things. And I found myself feeling incredibly overwhelmed and thinking, wow, is this going to be the rest of my life? Just paying bills and just going to work because I have to. And so in January of 2016, I started doing all of my own research on just how to pay off debt, how to pay off student loans, how to not live with debt forever. And through my research, I found that there was a lot of advice that was out there for kind of the general masses, but it felt a little tone deaf in terms of, there's particular challenges that I think a lot of women face. I think a lot of people of color face. I think making a lot of assumptions that everyone has the same kind of access to resources and support and mental health and all of those things. And so fast forward to 2019, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it, I ended up paying off all $300,000 of debt, including my student loans, including my mortgages. And I thought that was the end of my journey, but I realized that there's so much more to money than just paying off debt. And so continued on to what is the financial independence retire early movement. And in 2022, so last year, hit my FIRE goal, where I could comfortably say that I have saved enough for retirement and I can really start focusing on the life that I want to live in my 30s and not waiting until my 60s.
Incredible. Very, very inspiring. So during your debt-free journey, did you encounter any unexpected sources of inspiration that motivated you to keep going? How did that impact your mindset and approach?
The unexpected place that I thought was actually going to be a detriment to my journey was social media. I don't know about a lot of other folks, but I tended to find myself comparing myself to a lot of other people on social media. A lot of my friends had, very nice careers, and I had some friends who were doctors and lawyers and all the usual things that you would expect for people to be successful in and making a lot of money and them posting all their dream vacations. And I remember looking at social media, particularly Instagram, and saying, oh my gosh, like how come everyone else can afford their lives, but not I can't? Like, what am I doing wrong here? And so I ended up starting to post my personal journey when I was paying off my student loans in particular. I started to have little Post-its on my refrigerator where I would put the amount that I owe on my student loans. And even if I paid off $1 or $10, I would write a new Post-it with the new amount to motivate myself. And so I started taking pictures of my Post-its and just sharing them online. Like, oh my gosh, I started out with 72,000. Now I'm at 60,000. Now I'm at 50,000. And around the $42,000 mark, and it had only been a couple of months, all of those same people who I thought were living the big life and were making lots of money and I was comparing myself to, those are the people who are messaging me on DMs and saying, oh my gosh, I have student loans. I have all this stress. I am, running myself ragged. How are you doing this? And it turned out that rather than social media being a place that we could just compare ourselves to and kind of feel bad about ourselves, I turned it into a place where I could connect with people and share real challenges and also lessen the shame around money in particular.
And so take me back. How did you do that? Like, how did you pay it off? I mean, I'm incredibly interested now because I'm pretty sure a lot of people and listeners do have the same debts, like credit card debts, for example. And because it can be very, very stressful. And it's just sometimes you feel like you're drowning, and with the interest rate so high, how did you do it?
Yeah. This is the oversimplified version of it, but it's actually the same acronym that I now use to teach my students on how to crush their money goals. So I call my company Crush Your Money Goals because it spells out the word crush, the 5 steps that I personally took to be able to pay off the debt. And I think it makes it easier for people to understand. So in high level, the C stands for curating your accounts. So the first thing that I did was go and through all of my accounts, put them all in one place. In the States, we have an app called Mint that we can use to put all of our debts, our assets, our cash accounts, and our property. And then I was able to get a really clear picture of, okay, well, here's all the debt, but also here's all the assets that I have. And at the time, it wasn't a lot, but I had some assets too. And I started to think more in terms of my overall picture and not just feeling like I'm drowning in debt. Right? So that's the first thing I always tell other people to do is to focus on the overall picture and don't just focus on the debt piece. Then the R stands for reverse into independence. And so I try to take that really big goal and reverse it back into smaller chunks to the point where I felt like it was manageable. So as an example, the first step that I was really focused on tackling was my $72,000 of student loans. And so I said, well, I have no solution for how to pay off $72,000 of student loans, but how about if I were to break this down into smaller chunks? So pie in the sky, I would love to get it paid down in 2 years. That seems like a really lofty goal, but you know what? If I fail, worst case scenario, I'm still going to be better off than how I was before. And so I said $72,000 divided by 2 is $36,000 a year. Wow, that's more than what I make in salary. That still feels really overwhelming. So let's keep reversing that. So $36,000 divided by 12 months is about $3,000 per month. Still feeling overwhelmed? Okay, let's go reverse more by week. $30,000 per month is about $750 per week. And then I was like, okay, well, if I were to focus on this daily, it would be a little over $100 a day, right? So $750 is a little over $100 a day. So as you can see, it's not perfect math, but the point was to say, okay, I may not be smart enough or capable enough or confident enough that I can figure out $72,000, but am I smart enough to figure out $100 a day, even if I don't do it every single day? And so, I started out with just making $100 moves, basically. Like, okay, for example, like if I had $100 in my bank account, I would just use it and pay it straight towards the debt. That would be my $100 for the day. And another day, I would sell $100 worth of stuff on Facebook. And it's like, okay, that's my $100, and I put it towards my debt. Now, the key obviously was to actually take the money and put it towards the debt and not just use it towards other things. And then the U in crush stands for understand your net worth. And so that's where I really started to look at my total picture and say, well, are there other ways other than just, trying to make more money that I could maybe reallocate some things and find other ways to save money on other parts of my net worth. So for example, I refinanced my mortgage at the time to a lower interest rate. I was able to move some money into a high yield savings account so that it would earn a little bit more interest. I would go through every account on my list and say, is there any way that I could squeeze more money out of this without having to do extra work, other than maybe pick up the phone or talk to the bank or something like that? And then the S, and this is probably the most critical part of how I was able to pay off the $300,000, was to spend intentionally. And I don't like the idea that budgeting is restrictive. I really shifted on changing my mindset to say, you know what, I'm not spending money on this thing right now so that I can make space for this thing instead. So during that time period, I would love to say that it didn't come at a sacrifice, but I definitely, for the 2 years I was paying off student loans, I didn't go on as many vacations. I had to tell my girlfriends at the time who were, at that time I was having a lot of weddings and baby showers and all those things. And I had to tell my girlfriend sometimes, I'm like, pick one of these events that you want me to go to. I can't go to all the things, right? And we really got on a very specific budget, and we did it every single month, my husband and I, and that really changed the game in both our mindset and also our practical spending habits. And then the H, which is the last piece of it, is heal your money wounds. And it's, to me, it's the hardest step, and it's why it's like the last thing, is that as I was going through this whole process, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people, going through all of these finances, like really, changed how I was thinking, in terms of like creating a lot more anxiety during that time, like facing it head on. And I realized that I had a lot of different money stories, especially as an Asian American, of how my parents told me I should spend money, how I felt like a failure when I wasn't doing things right. And so the biggest thing that I did for myself during that time was I actually committed to weekly therapy. And that actually was a very, very big change in my overall personal finances, because I realized a lot of stuff that was tied to my money was because of, past trauma and, lack of self-worth. And that to me was probably the biggest and best investment I made into the journey overall.
Wow. A lot of sacrifices and healing, and that's incredible. So was it hard to come up with did you have to hustle to come up with $100 per day to pay off that debt? I know you sacrificed a lot of things, but you'd also have to produce the income to make that.
Some days were easier than others. At the time, I decided to take on a sales job where I could make commission on it. So anytime I got a bigger commission check, I just threw the whole thing at the debt, instead of what a lot of people do is like, oh, let me treat myself a little bit. And I had to, train myself to say, okay, I'm paying it now so that I can treat myself a lot later on. And so some days were definitely harder than others, but I also tell people, and I have to tell myself often, that this is not a race. This is not, a perfectionist kind of thing. If you have a perfectionist mentality, then you will probably end up quitting relatively quickly. And so my barometer, even though it is very much against my upbringing of like, do your best in all the tests and be the best student, I give myself, I follow the 80-20 rule, which is if I can do this 80% of the time, I'm allowed to mess up 20% of the time. So even if there are some days that I didn't make my $100, I was like, you know what, that's okay. I can try again the next day. But one trick that I had for myself was that if I had, for example, like that big commission check, and let's say it was $500, then I would just do it all at once. And I would like, okay, now I get a break for the next 4 days. Like that covered me for the next 5 days. And so that would give me a little rest in between.
What is the biggest misconception people have about achieving financial independence, and how have you overcome it based on your experience?
I personally think that the biggest misconception around financial independence is that once you hit your number, that it's going to be sunshine and rainbows and you'll feel like all your problems are solved. And I would love to tell you that I've overcome it, but that's actually the phase that I'm in right now, which is, a lot of people set these goals for themselves, whether it's, financial independence or just paying off your debt, and expecting this like huge dopamine rush and feeling like, oh my gosh, my life is going to be forever changed now I hit this number. And what I learned for myself was that in trying to reach that number, I was missing out on the joy that was a journey itself. And then I would reach that goal, and then I would not celebrate it, and then move on to the next goal really quickly. And so, for example, in 2019, where I paid off my $300,000 of debt, when we paid off the house, it was rather anticlimactic in the sense of, unless I was a person who was literally telling everybody, hey, I paid off my house. It's not the same thing as buying the house or having a baby or having a wedding. There's no like, obvious representation that you've done this thing, right? And as someone who's also a really strong introvert, I found myself feeling really shy, or even, I don't know if shame is the right word, but just a little like, oh, am I being braggy by telling people that I paid off my house? Like, because that's not a common thing that people talk about. But then, by then I was like, you know what? If we as women can celebrate every time someone has a baby and every time someone buys a house or gets married, like, why shouldn't we celebrate when we pay off our houses or finish a master's program or start a business, right? And so I decided to do the hard thing for me and put it out to people and let people know, hey, me and AJ paid off the house and I'm really excited about it. And I was so surprised by how many people were cheering on for us and who had been following our journey all along too. But then, a week afterwards, I was like, okay, well, that was great. Like, now what? And so, as a misconception, I really want people to understand that if you are pursuing any sort of financial goal, don't attach yourself so much to just that number, and try to enjoy the experience all along the way, and don't expect that, that by hitting that number that you'll materially become a better person. I think you have to work on on enjoying the life and the things that you're accomplishing, throughout the whole time you're doing it, and not just at the very end.
So it's a continuous process and self-learning and hitting new goals as well.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share a time when a minor decision or a change made a major impact on your financial situation? What lessons did you learn from that experience?
I would say it was a relatively minor decision for me, but I think it's a major decision for other people, which was to stop using my credit cards while I was paying down debt. And so what I mean by that was that I literally cut up my credit cards and I stopped using them. And it took a lot of convincing for my husband to do the same thing, because in his mind, as most people think, it's like, well, if I'm paying off every month, then I'm not really losing money. But I said to myself, I really want to focus on paying off our debt. And it's just one less thing that I have to think about. If I don't have to look at our credit card bills and the money's just coming out straight from our bank account, then it's just one less thing I have to manage when I'm trying to pay off this significant amount of student loan debt. And what we found was that when we didn't use the credit cards, we spent a lot less money. Like, a lot of people say, well, I'm just putting gas and I'm just putting groceries and it's not really changing my spending habits. Yes, it is. It's 100% changing your spending habits, because I promise you, if you see the money leaving your bank account in real time versus it just going to the credit card and you think you're earning points, then you will spend differently. And so, as a small example, because I wasn't using credit cards, I would sometimes literally go to the grocery store and I would just have like two $20 bills. And I would just be like, you know what? This is what I've got to spend at the grocery. And if I got to the counter and my items were more than $40, I was like, well, I guess I got to put something back, right? Whereas before, when I had a credit card, it's like, put this in the cart, put that in the cart, and then before you know it, you have like $100 when you went there just to get milk, right? So, I strongly recommend for people, especially if you're someone who is focused on paying down credit card debt, which is a very big, issue right now, is to temporarily pause using your credit cards until your credit card debt is cleared, and then you can go back to considering using credit cards. But actually, my husband and I stopped using credit cards for like 6 years, and we only started using them again this past year, and it's primarily because of my business.
You do recommend still continuing on to use the credit card for your business, but not personal.
So for me, I would say the only reason that I'm comfortable using credit cards now is because I am so disciplined in terms of my budgeting, and I'm very clear on how I spend my money now. But I work with a lot of people who have credit card debt, and they think that they have their spending under control, but all it takes is one job loss, one emergency, one thing that will throw them off, and all the things that they used to put in the credit cards now are starting to pile up in terms of interest. And that's what I've mostly seen with a lot of my students. A lot of people assume that credit card debt is just because you're irresponsible and you're spending too much and you're shopping too much. No, actually, a lot of people that I've seen who have credit card debt was able to pay off their bills month over month until something bad happened, and then they started falling behind, and then the interest started running away from them. So I always tell people, really, you're only in a position to use a credit card if you have at least 1 month's worth of a contingency fund first, and you're not living paycheck to paycheck.
That's so handy, that advice. I think. But were there any mentors or role models who played a role in shaping your financial journeys that you looked up to, and how did they influence your perspective?
Absolutely. I followed a lot of personal finance people online in the beginning because I didn't know anyone personally that I could speak to, that I would feel comfortable talking about money. And so I follow a lot of people on Instagram. And so what I think is really fun and full circle is that two people that I followed, one is a woman named Tanya Hester. She is kind of considered the matriarch of financial independence. And I saw her speak at FinCon, which is a conference for personal finance creators. And it was in 2019. And I was thinking about starting my financial education business. And I saw her speak on stage and was like, wow, she's like so poised and put together, but she's also like literally living financial independence. And she also had a lot of opinions about how to align your values with your money. And then another person that I followed for a long time was a guy named Anthony O'Neill, who's known a lot in the debt-free space. And I just liked him because he's like a 30-something-year-old like me, and he's cool, and he likes hip hop and cars, and it wasn't the typical like, oh, just don't spend money and like look broke. He was just like, no, I want to have a nice house and I will have a nice car, but I'll still be debt free. And so I followed those two people for a long time, and what was a really full circle moment for me this past year is that I've now spoken on the same stages as them at the same conferences, and so I've gotten to speak with both of them individually and let them know, wow, like you really influenced me before, and I, in both cases, I had to speak after them, which made me even more nervous. I saw them on stage first, and I was like, oh my God, I'm the person right after them. And one of the nicest compliments that happened when I met Tanya recently at an event earlier this year was that she knew who I was, and she said, she basically said to me, she's like, I don't want to go after you because I've seen you speak before, and I think you're great. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you were my role model 4 years ago. So I'm saying that to people to say that, if you have role models out there, like don't necessarily assume that you might not ever meet them, because there might be a way that you will.
Dreams do come true. That's fascinating. Super fascinating. With every journey, every journey has its setbacks. Can you share a memorable failure or setback that you encountered on your way to success, and how did you use it as a stepping stone to greater achievements? Like you've been a public speaker now, you've just achieved all this success. But tell me one of the setbacks that you've had.
I would say a setback that I had in the last couple of years specifically, as maybe many people can relate, is that I invested in more risky assets. Particularly, I didn't invest in crypto directly, but I invested in some companies that were related to blockchain. And of course, with all of the other crypto stuff, the whole industry was impacted. And I lost like six figures in investments.
Was it like an ICO, one of those when it was in? What was it? A small crypto, small unknown?
It was. I basically invested in an ETF that was related to that was invested in all the companies that had that were focused on growing the blockchain technology. So some of them were like crypto type related things, but it was also companies like PayPal, right? Like other banks that might have advancing technologies in blockchain. And so I was never into crypto at all. But I was like, you know what? I think it is really interesting, like the technology behind it. I think the use case of it in crypto is like not the use case I would use, but I was like, you know what? For example, like how come we don't use blockchain to, for luxury bags as an example? Like, I feel like that would be an interesting use case for blockchain, right? Like, I thought it was interesting to use blockchain for real estate transactions, like other more like tangible uses. So when everything kind of crashed with crypto, including, that particular investment, what I was really mad about was actually not even the money itself, although it was a lot of money. It was still only like 10% of my overall net worth. So it wasn't like a huge, like it wasn't going to cripple me. But I think what I was more upset about was that I realized that I wasn't as passionate about that that I really was kind of following a trend. And so in hindsight, of course, we can all say, it's like hindsight is 2020, right? Like, oh, if I knew what I knew now, then I wouldn't have done it. But now that I'm more focused on investing into things that I really feel like a strong passion about, I know better in terms of like doing more due diligence and also really thinking about, well, is this something that I would bet on in the long run? Like even when it has a downside to it, like I still believe in it long enough to stick it out even in the rough times. And so now my investing is more diversified, but also I realize that my interest is more in investing in other small businesses. And so instead of investing into things that are just trendy, now I use it as a stepping stone to teach myself on what is a future goal of mine, which is to become an angel investor and learn how to invest in businesses that I'm really excited about.
So they're the small businesses, what you're passionate about, and you're doing your due diligence beforehand, and that's more for long term. Do you find that that's risky as well?
It's risky, but it's a risk I'm willing to take because I know the humans now. And I think that's the other piece is like I'm actually interacting with the people that I would invest in. So right now, for example, I currently run an accelerator program for small businesses. And it's for me to teach these businesses how they can become investable businesses that I would eventually give them money at some point. And in my current cohort, there is a interior designer, there is a comedy arts theater, there is a industrial pipe business, there's a leadership coach, there's a psychotherapist, there is a person who teaches coping mechanisms for kids with mental health and trauma issues, and there is a handyman. And these are all businesses that I think the traditional investors, like angel investors would ignore. But these are all businesses that one, I see there's a huge need for in the market, but also that every person who is running those businesses, like I genuinely like them as a human being. And I would bet my money on them not only because they're good business people, but because they're good people.
Definitely have a lot of potential right there going into a market that's niche and unique. So tell me, transitioning from debt to financial freedom has been a significant feat for you. How do you maintain a healthy relationship with money and avoid falling back into old habits?
Well, I would say it's an unreasonable expectation that you would never fall back into old habits. And so I still follow that 80-20% rule where I will say an old habit that it seems to be dying very hard with me is buying shoes, even though I definitely do not need another pair of shoes. So what I've done for myself is, I just had to have I've had to have a real talk with myself. It's like, okay, girl, like you're going to buy the shoes. It's just like, let's live with that. Right. And so, what I would really ask myself is, is that old habit, is it something that you can afford now? Right. So what I mean by that is when I achieved financial independence, I still had this back of my mind, like, oh, buying shoes is a waste of money and you shouldn't eat out. That's a waste of money. Like there's a lot of things that you should be saving money instead. But once I reached financial independence, I gave myself a specific amount every month where I could just spend money and not feel guilty about it. And so one of the things that I strongly recommend all of my clients to do is to allocate 25% of their budget, and I do this myself, towards things that actually make me feel alive and I enjoy and I don't feel bad about it. And it doesn't have to match what other people think is a good use of money. So a big example for me is K-pop. I will spend a lot of money on anything BTS related, on Blackpink related, like K-pop is my thing, and I don't care if anyone else thinks it's a waste of money, but I will spend money on that, and I allocate that to my budget versus saying, oh, I can't buy that.
So you still manage to have a fulfilling life beyond all the numbers, I'm guessing, and as long as you keep that 25% allocated, then you'll still be able to have financial success and still be happy. Now, let's talk about times of economic uncertainty, like we are going through that in some ways. What advice do you have what advice do you have for maintaining a strong financial foundation during the downturns, especially during these uncertain times with high interest rates and inflation going through the roof?
Number one, I would say every time is an uncertain time. There is no certain times in history. Like if you go back since I was an adult, right? So I graduated from university in 2007, and so in my adult lifetime, there has been the economic crisis of 2008. There has been multiple kind of other mini recessions since then. There has been the pandemic. There has now been high interest rates. I mean, there's 100 things that's happened for any individual person. And so the assumption that, so I basically what I'm saying is that we should always assume it's going to be an uncertain time. We should always assume that there's going to be some kind of downturn, because there will be. I mean, the history has shown that it's never been completely straight line up all the time, right? So that being said, if we just make the assumption that the next uncertain time is coming around, what can you do to protect yourself against that? Number one is to absolutely have what I call a contingency fund versus an emergency fund, and stop using the phraseology of emergency fund, because a lot of people that I taught would build up an emergency fund and then they would not use it, even though they should use it, and they would put things on credit cards or try to hoard that money. And so I tell people to start off with a 1 month contingency fund first, meaning you have your basic expenses to cover your housing, your utilities, your transportation, your health, and your food for 1 month. Having that in place at all times, regardless. If you have no other debt, then I would go up to 3 months. But then if you have any other debt, then I would focus on paying down debt, regardless of if it's a good time or bad time. And specifically for me, I will say becoming debt-free has been the singular game changer in my ability to ride out good times and bad. If you notice, a lot of people who are struggling right now during uncertain economic times is because they have debt.
Crazy. Yeah.
Right. And like you said, high interest rates. So I'll say I'm saying this, not to be braggy. I don't really care what the interest rates are right now. You know why? Because I have no debt. Right. And actually for me, it's great that interest rates are high, because now I'm putting my money into a high yield savings account, or I'm buying CDs or treasury bills or other things, and they're paying me way more for doing the work. Right. So having a contingency fund and paying down your debt are the two biggest things that I think could singularly maintain anyone to have a better and stronger financial position, regardless of where we are in macroeconomics.
And speaking of investment decisions, do you have any, hang on a second. Do you have any investments that have become particularly successful? And what made you, what factors influenced your choices?
This is going to sound so corny, but I'm going to say the best investment that I've made is into my own business, both mathematically and also for my lifestyle and for my mental health. I, of course, started off like a lot of other people, just trying to put money towards retirement and learning how to put things into the stock market and stuff like that. But the biggest bang for my buck has been investing into my own business. And so, as full disclosure, right, is for me, for example, in 2020, I started my business when most people were really struggling with, how to make sure they have income. And again, I had no debt at the time, so I was able to take a lot more risk. And my business, since 2020, has now made over 500K, gross revenue. And I've had about a 50% margin on that. So I've netted 250K, and there's nowhere else that I would have invested to get 100% return, right? So if I had expenses of 250K and then I made 250K on top of the 250K I spent, right? I made 100% return on my money. I don't know where else I would have done that, right? The best I would have done in the stock market is 10%, right? And then, even real estate, as crazy as real estate here is in the US, I wouldn't have made 100% return. I would have made a 30, 40, 50%, which is, by the way, still a great return. It's a huge return for those kind of assets. But I strongly encourage, especially women who want more flexibility in their lives and want more control over their time, investing into a business, and particularly a business that is related around expertise. Meaning like it's not high capital intensive. To me, is the best investment that you can make.
Because you're doing like coaching and money, helping others with their money.
It started in 2018 with a podcast, a free podcast that I didn't charge anyone for, so, I'm saying this as a meta example right now, right? Is, 2018, I did my first podcast. It was meant to be a one and done 10 episodes, and that was it. That podcast led to TV, led to speaking gigs, which then led to me starting my academy, which then led to now I write for Forbes and and CNET and a lot of these other places. It all started out with me saying I want to start a business that helps people.
That's incredibly inspiring. Congratulations on that success. So, all from a podcast. That's amazing. And so, how do you plan to grow? What does your business look like in the next few years? What aspirations do you have for it?
So, what I will say is that I have a goal to, quote unquote, fully retire in 2 years. I'm 38 years old right now, so 40 is just like an arbitrary magical number that I want to get to, where I want to get to like my full hire number, which is about 2.5 million. And right now I'm at 1.4, so I have $1 million to go. And my goal for my business is to, actually for the next 2 years, to really focus on streamlining my operations and really improving the quality of my offerings. So as a prime example, right now, a lot of my coaching is highly contingent on one-on-one with me. And so, now I'm running up against obviously a capacity issue. I had to start turning clients away, right? And so the next 2 years, I'm less focused on growth on revenue, but more focused on scaling up the amount of people that I can serve. So I hope to maintain at least a similar revenue pattern, but be able to really ramp up how many people I can serve every year. And my goal is to have 100 people that I help work towards their first $1 million of net worth. And the thought process is if I can help 100 people at $1 million, then we're creating $1 billion of new wealth in the hands of really good people.
Have you had any incredible students that have achieved amazing results from your work?
Oh my gosh, like too many to say. That's a whole podcast episode in of itself. I will say that I have had the privilege and the honor of working with so many different women across a lot of different socioeconomic statuses and across different places. Like my current cohort right now, I have people across all 4 time zones in the U.S. I also have students in the UK and in Spain. And in Portugal and in a lot of different places, which I think has been really fun. I will say that some of the most amazing stories to me are not necessarily the dollar amounts that they have accomplished, even though I've had several people who've crossed over $1 million while they work with me, which I think is so awesome. But some of the most amazing stories that I've had are particularly around the women who built enough finances and confidence to leave their day jobs. And so I'll shout out one particular person who just comes to mind right now. Her name is Tara, and she was a PR professional for 30 years. And she came to me and she said, you know what? My real calling is stand-up comedy. And wow. I was like, okay, let's do it. And this month she's moving from Charlotte, where we are, to Nashville, and she's pursuing stand-up comedy full time. And she's in her 50s. And so I am inspired by her because she showed me that one, like, I'm sorry, I don't know about you, but I think stand-up comedy is like a really terrifying career to choose, like for a lot of different reasons. And so I was like, wow, she's so brave. She's willing to pick up and go to make that dream come true. But also she showed me that like age is nothing but a number, right? Like, a lot of people would say like, oh, maybe it's too late for you. You're in your 50s. You should have done this in your 30s. And she's like, nope, better do it now, right? So there's been so many women that I've been able to get inspiration from, and I feel really, really grateful that I get to do this for my job.
Wow, that sounds like a very fulfilling career that you have and that you've built for yourself too. So congrats on that. Now, staying informed is essential in the investment landscape. How do you stay updated about trends and opportunities? And are there any specific resources or strategies that you recommend?
For me, my number one source is YouTube. I just tend to be a visual person, so I watch a lot of YouTube videos about what's going on in the market. There's a particular newsletter that I follow. It's called Need to Know. And it's more general news, but so much of news right now is finance stuff. And so I like that newsletter. It pops into my inbox every morning. And it's what I like about it is just like it's like, here's the 10 things that are happening today that you should know about. So I tend to stay on trend about that. And the other way that I really stay ahead on just kind of what's happening for more specifically on personal finances. And I mean, it's a bit selfish, but since I'm a writer for Forbes, I do follow a lot of other Forbes writers, so that I can see what other people are talking about, so that I don't necessarily like duplicate efforts, but also it's like, oh, okay, like they have an interesting point of view on this. I might have a different point of view on it. And so, I also like to actually follow people who I disagree with, on personal finance stuff.
Is that to get their contrarian view?
I think one, it's to not be in an echo chamber, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have to agree with everything that people say, but I want to learn what other people are saying, even if it doesn't match with what my views are. But then it also, for me, it's also a good intellectual exercise. It's like, oh, when I see something that I don't agree with, it's not just like, oh, I don't like it. It's like, well, let me have some intellectual talking points as to why I disagree with that. So that would be my recommendations.
That's awesome, because that will also develop your critical thinking skills as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what investment trends or sectors do you believe hold promise for the future, and why?
I mean, I've always, my number one love, other than my own business and small business, right? I think those are always things to bet on. And I would always tell people, like, if you have the guts to do it, starting a small business is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it's also been the most rewarding thing. But aside from that, real estate, I've just always been a fan of real estate. A good chunk of my net worth has been a result of just buying and selling my own primary residences in a smart way. And so my husband and I bought and sold like 3 homes in the last 8 years or so. And that's probably netted like $300K of our net worth, which we then took and invested into other things. And so real estate is not something that will ever go away. Will there be some challenges with real estate? Absolutely, especially if you are someone who, especially for a lot of millennials and people who are just like trying to buy their first home and stuff. But I have a client who did cross over her first $1 million of net worth, and she tells me, and she's in her 60s, she's like, oof, do you think these interest rates are high? When I was buying my first home, the interest rates were 18%. This is nothing. Right? So, like, even though we're saying, oh, in our lifetime, or since we've been adults, maybe this is like, oh, it feels like, oh, it's so rough right now. But you can always find another place in history or another place in the world where it's even harder, and somehow people are figuring it out, right? So I think real estate is a place that I will always have a love for when it comes to investing.
Looking back on your journey, what is the single most impactful piece of advice you'd like to pass on to others seeking financial freedom?
I would say the biggest piece of advice that I would give that's practical is to calculate your financial independence number. And so you can just Google how to calculate it. Actually, I have an article if you want to read it on this is exactly how much you need to invest in order to quit your day job. That's the name of the title. And essentially just walks you through how to calculate your financial independence number. And in doing that, you have a more specific goal to work towards versus, I just need to save up as much money as possible. And most people will have a mini heart attack when they calculate the number, because likely it's going to be in the millions. But as someone who had that same heart attack 7 years ago and now has been able to accomplish it, I would say it's only impossible if you decided that it is. So once you calculate that number, cry or have your panic attack about it for 24 hours, and then after 24 hours, get to work and start building your plan on how to get there.
Thank you so much for sharing your advice today. It's been very transparent, very useful. I'm sure so many of my audiences would find it incredibly helpful. So really appreciate that. And finally, before we go, where can people find you?
I am primarily on Instagram, and my handle is Bernadette Joy. And if you want to learn more about how I became a debt-free millionaire and the specific tools you can use, I have a free guide. It's called the 10 Money Tools That Help Me Become a Debt-Free Millionaire. And you can find it at crushyourmoneygoals.com/free guide. And I will share all of my best resources for you to start your financial freedom journey.
Thank you. I'll get that and leave that in the link for my audiences to share. Thank you so much for your time. And it was lovely to speak to you, Bernadette. Take care.